we get a funny noise with that. Okay, let's see. Okay, thanks everybody for joining. I have to admit that I got a little bit busy today with other happenings around the curling world, but I did manage to put some slides together and prep some stuff to discuss. So we'll go through things. Please, if anybody, if you have questions during the as we're going through this, please stop me. We may jump back and forth among some things. And I mean, remember that this is your time, so I want it to be as useful as possible to everybody. So that's what I will say to begin. Okay, so this is the second session of the Learn to Skip series for strategy. I can't figure out how to make this let's see, presenter view. Would this be better? Is that better? I can't see anybody anymore either.
Yes.
Okay. All right, cool. So we'll probably have to bounce back and forth out of presenter mode and regular mode, edit mode, but we'll leave it here for now. Okay. So like I did the other day on Sunday in Fremont, I have just a few comments and assumptions just to kind of set the parameters for what we're gonna talk about. And one of the things I mentioned on Sunday was that a lot of this discussion is going to assume that the team is competitive or at least serious. If the team's not really interested in winning and scoring and working together, that's a completely different situation. That's a team that's only here for the beer, and those teams exist. But we're talking about teams that are trying to have goals and do things, and in this case, win games. So even though people may be new curlers and unsure of their own shot making, for a lot of the discussion, we're going to assume that routine shots are likely to be made. You can't go into, you can't plan your entire strategy around people always missing open hits or always missing draws to the 8 foot, those kind of things. We're going to assume that those kind of things are likely to, shots that are likely to be made. Similar to what we talked about on Sunday, where the skip should be able to make good draws and regular hits, and the lead should be able to throw guards and all that kind of stuff. Again, just repeating something I said the other day. So the series is called Learn to Skip, but I strongly believe that understanding strategy and the perspective of the skip will make players at all positions better. So even if you don't come out of this whole series and jump into being a skip full time, you will still be a better curler and more better a better teammate for whoever you have at skip. And finally, a lot of the specific strategy discussion is going to assume that the ice conditions are good. In general, curling both ways, the speed is reasonable. We don't play on perfect ice, so even if we play on imperfect ice, I still think that the concepts are useful. And additionally, I think that being able to adapt to different ice conditions will make you a better skip. This is a thing that I've kind of noticed in playing in different places. When you're used to the ice not behaving the way that you might assume, if you can do that ice mapping that we were working on Sunday, you'll notice issues with conditions on dedicated ice that other skips might miss, and they might continue to try to call a shot that's not there, and you might recognize that it's there. So you will at least be good at recognizing when there's there's issues in the ice and being able to adapt to those situations. Okay, I'm gonna just give some credits up front. Probably number one is this book, Introduction to Curling Strategy. I found this book when I first started curling. It happens to be by one of our club members, Gabrielle Coleman. She played quite a bit in the wintertime. Most of her curling was many years ago. She kind of took a long break, but she's a very good curler and has thought a lot about how to become a good curler coming off of arena ice. So a really good resource in our club, and she has written 2 books on developing as a curler. One is like kind of her story of becoming a competitive curler, and that's interesting in its own right, and probably has some lessons for aspiring skips too. But I strongly recommend the Introduction to Curling Strategy book for anybody that wants to be a skip. It's $4 on Kindle. I don't know if it's probably not in print anymore, but if you can get it, get a Kindle copy for $4, it's like well worth it. And I've drawn a lot of inspiration from that book. Actually, one of the best parts about that book is after she lays out her thoughts on curling strategy, kind of the second half of the book is entirely problems, for lack of a better word, situations, and she talks about, like, she asks like multiple choice questions, like what would you do in this situation, and then thoroughly discusses each of those. It's really valuable. Second are 2 clinics that I've attended. So one is by this guy Bill Shearhart, that probably nobody has heard of. He used to be the head of curling development in Canada, and actually Gabrielle drew a lot from Bill's clinic, and I was fortunate enough to go to a clinic that he led several years ago, and his way of thinking about the game is, I find, really outstanding. Currently, he has a podcast called A Pain in the Glass, which is a follow-on from a blog that he used to keep up, also called A Pain in the Glass, and I think he has a book called by that same name. So he's been a coach and dealt with all kinds of players, and I would recommend checking out that podcast. Also, I went to a clinic by Kevin Martin. His clinic was also very good, kind of very formulaic, but very helpful in emphasizing some things. And I think we'll get to some of his ideas as we go through this. Watching curling on TV is a great way to learn about things. So Russ and Cheryl on TSN for like the Brier and the Scotties have been awesome. And then if you ever watch some of the games on Sportsnet, which are the Grand Slam games, those are Kevin Martin and Mike Harris do the commentating for those, and they are all very smart curlers and will often talk about why people do the things that they do on the ice. Next is this tool called Curling GG. I love this thing. This, again, showing off the talent that we have around our club. This was developed by our very own Mikhail Samin, who built this thing a couple of years ago. I think it was during the pandemic. He built this thing, and I use this a lot to think about what shots are possible, what options might be available, why did somebody do a thing that they did, and we're going to use that today. And I suggest it's all free. I suggest that you take advantage of it as well. And finally, I've learned, most of like what I've learned has been or a lot of what I've learned has been talking to skips that or people that have skipped for me, starting with TC and then Gary, and for a long time Tom Diaz, and then Richard and Andy. And so I've had a lot of discussions about strategy, often like specific situations, but these, use the people around you as resources, and, so both your skips and the opposing skips. Okay, so the next thing I want to just mention are kind of the difference between strategy and tactics. So often curlers will get into a conversation or argument about what they think like a particular shot should be called for like a given situation. And this is like, I think what most people think of when they're thinking about, I really like curling strategy. I want to think about what would I do when I see this set of rocks right here. So does anybody have any suggestions about, like, so blue is going to throw next. Does anybody have any suggestions about what blue should do?
Where are we in the end?
Oh, interesting question. Okay. Any other thoughts?
Blue has hammer.
Okay. Yeah. So you have already avoided my trap, which is that I think a lot of people would just like look at the rocks and decide, okay, I'm going to do this thing because I see two red rocks here and I'm blue, and maybe like they're actually lined up really nicely for an easy double. So I'm going to throw a double. And this is a trap that you can fall into when you're skipping, to just look at the rocks in front of you and make a decision and not consider like what's really important, which is it's all about the context. So who has hammer? What's the score? What end is it? Who's throwing? These are all critical things. So this situation at the right, if it's the, if it's the last stone of the game and I'm blue and I'm up by I'm up by a point, if I hit those two red rocks and they go away, I win. And where I got this situation from is, if I'm blue and I'm down by 2 points and there's no guards and nothing else, like I can't hit those rocks because that's going to leave an easy hit for red to basically end the game. So what happened in this situation was blue actually used those red rocks as guards, and they threw a draw around those reds, which prevented red from taking them out. And this was one of the most famous Briar finishes of all time from 2004. It was recently featured in a Substack by John Cullen, which was really interesting read. And so in that case, like, you can't hit those red rocks. You got to save them and use them to your advantage, even though they're red rocks and you're throwing blues. So all of this is getting at the fact that shot selection is really tactics, and tactics need guidance from strategy. So there's multiple levels of strategy, and that's what we're gonna talk about for a bit. And so in Gabrielle's terms, there's game plans, there's end plans, and then there's tactical plans, or what I really just think of as shot calling. And one of those, like starting from the top, the game plan, that informs the end plan, which informs the tactical plan. So you kind of need to at least have some idea of like what all these things are before you're gonna go set the broom and tell somebody to throw a shot. Okay, so a thing that I was talking to another person who's like kind of a developing skip about like what are things that you wish you knew about skipping. And what they told me was like they had thought about these ideas of like game plans and end plans, and what they said was like realizing that those things don't have to be very complicated was an eye-opener for them. So let's talk about some game plans. So in my mind, the game plan is a general approach to how the skip is going to call a game to best suit their team. And when I say best suit their team, I really mean best suit their team to make shots. So one other like little thing that might be important and might be worth clarifying is that games, especially at our level, and especially when the teams are like relatively equally matched, games are mostly won and lost on who makes more shots than the other team. So you're like, whether you do one shot or another you might spend like a long time looking for the perfect shot, but it's not helpful if you can't make that shot. So you got to have a plan that's going to suit your team and enable you to make what it might be the second best decision. But if it's a shot that you feel confident that your team can make, then it's probably the best decision. So if your goal is to make shots, then also your goal is to make it difficult for the opposition to make shots, or try to make their shots more complicated. So like I said, these game plans, they don't necessarily have to be complicated. So like a few examples, most of these are things that I have thought of over the years when I'm like getting ready to play. So first one, let's say I want to play it clean and conservative and just capitalize on opposition mistakes. So this is a thing that I have done frequently, like when I'm playing with my competitive team, with like people like Jeffrey and Ozzy, who are really good hitters, and so I can afford to just kind of hit a lot of rocks, try to keep it open and clean, and make sure that I don't give up a bunch of points stupidly. And eventually, like, probably the opposition is going to make mistakes, and I'm going to be able to capitalize on them. And if they don't make mistakes, then at least I'm not going to get into too much trouble. So that's a thing I've thought of. I've seen people play very aggressively and try to play every end to score. Like, that's probably that's, in the curling world, I'd say that's an unorthodox game plan, but that is how that person likes to play, or how those people like to play. And if it works for them, if it makes sense to them, then maybe that's a reasonable game plan. It wouldn't work for me, but if it works for others, so be it. I think a very common thing, particularly for developing skips, would be to have like one style of play for ends where you have hammer. Just like basically have a formula. I'm going to do that. Like when I have hammer, I'm going to always do the same thing. And when I don't have hammer, I'm going to always do this same thing. And I think that's a logical approach. I think I've done that over the years, and it kind of keeps things simple. The next one is like, what if the opponents are, this is maybe more thinking about like making the opposition miss shots, or making those shots difficult for the opponents. So I've thought of cases where, all right, the opponents are big hitters, so I want to junk it up and throw a bunch of guards and try to frustrate them. This particularly, I unfortunately didn't get a chance to implement this, but I was at a bonspiel I was at one time. Things were lining up that I might play against a team that has Darren Molding, who is a Canadian champion and like a supreme hitter. And one of his teammates asked me, like, what would you have done if you had to play against us? Like play against Darren. And my answer was like, I'm going to throw double center guards every single end and make sure that he's got no path to like hit a bunch of things. And this person told me, oh, that's probably a good idea, because if you try to get into a hitting game against Darren, you're going to lose every time. And so, you can decide on a game plan based on your opponent. A couple of things that come up, like in our situation, playing in San Jose and Fremont, there's times when the ice is like super straight. That is like, we don't see any curl. It's just like rocks are going dead straight down the ice. This might be a little bit less now that we've conditioned the rocks, but this sometimes happened in the past. And if the ice is super straight, that means there's not going to be any way to draw around a guard. So how are we gonna like get around that? Instead, we'll try to play tight guards, tap those rocks into the house, and keep like our rocks in the house guarded as we move through ends. You know, maybe more frequently for us, particularly like on sheet 1 these days, is the ice is falling dramatically. All right, well, if I know that going in, I might have a game plan that that is set up to deal with that. And the way that I normally think about that is like, I'm going to try to just like have my team throw as many draws as possible, try to figure out draw weight, and if I can help it at all, I'm going to never throw a hit. Just try to keep throwing that same draw, figure out the lines for drawing into the house, and get everybody accustomed to throwing that like nice top house T line weight, and make the opposition deal with my rocks. Does this make sense to anybody, or does anybody have like any other, like, you know, for people that have skipped before, does anybody have any game plans that they've like shown up at the arena and like had in their head? All right, I will take that as a no. Okay, so once you've got a game plan, you start playing the game, and now we're at like the sort of the next level of strategy, and that's where starting to think about what do we want to do for this end. So I think there's kind of like two things that the skip needs to decide as they're starting the end. So first is like, what is what's the goal for the end? Like, what do we want to accomplish? What do we need to accomplish here? And often that boils down to like, are we trying to score? If so, like how many points do we want to score? How can we accept 1 point, or do we need multiple points here? Because depending on the answer to that, you're going to play that end differently. If you don't have hammer, are you playing for the force? Are you playing to score by stealing, or are you just like happy to prevent a big end? So once you have that in mind, you can start to plan out how you're gonna like what shots you're gonna throw, how you're gonna approach the end from a shot making perspective. The second thing that the skip needs to decide is the tolerance for risk. So you've got a goal in mind. Unfortunately, the opponent skip is trying to not make you achieve that goal. So you need to decide as a skip, like how aggressive do I want to be to meet that goal. If it's like if it's the end of the game situation and the game is tied, the only acceptable outcome is to score, right? Like you can't accept any other outcome, so you are going to take on whatever risk it is, as long as you have any chance of scoring. That's what you're going to do. It doesn't matter if like they're sitting 8, I got to get 1 rock in there to score. It's not like I can just try to prevent a big end. Let's see. So I think a nice way that Gabrielle approaches this idea of end plans is a thing that she calls a goal chart. It's not really even so much a chart as like a little list that you might have in your head. So, for example, this is I'm almost positive that this is the goal chart that Tom Diaz had in his head every game we ever played when we had hammer in the first end. I'm sure that he wanted to score 2, but he was willing to accept scoring only 1. We never blank in league, so that's kind of, I'm sure he'd be fine with a blank, but that's almost not an option. And I also think that he would probably accept giving up a steal of 1. Just the way that he played, he didn't seem to care if we gave up 1, and he learned some things about the ice. He was all right with that. But we did not want to. We wanted to avoid giving up a steal of more than 1. So like that's like an approach for the first end. Again, if you are in the last end and you're down by a point, you need 2 points, you will probably accept the score of 1 to go to some kind of tiebreaker or take the tie. But any other outcome is unacceptable. So you're going to play that end in such a way to address those wants and needs. So let's open it up a little bit. So what factors do people think will determine the end plan?
Score.
Yeah, the score. That's good.
Who has hammer?
Yeah, hammer is probably the first thing that people will think about. Anything else?
Which end it is.
Sorry, say that again.
Which end it is.
Yeah, which end it is, exactly. Anything else?
Ice conditions.
Yeah, ice conditions are good. Can't execute some types of plans if you on particular ice conditions. The last one on my list is maybe a little bit abstract, but I'm interested to hear what other people might think.
I mean, any knowledge you might have gained about the opponents so far, what they can and can't, what you think they can and can't hit, or for draw, or.
Yep, you might have learned things over the course of the game that you can take advantage of once you get started into an end. I might describe that a little differently than an end plan, but it's a good thing to be aware of. Any other ideas? So the last thing that I had on my list was the game plan. So if you have a game plan of like a particular kind of game plan, that's probably going to like determine how you're approaching specific ends. And so like one way of thinking about, and one thing that might happen in your game plan is you might learn something about the opposition, which makes you rethink your original game plan. So yeah, if you learn something about, that the lead can't hit, for example, well, your end plan might completely change because you might decide, all right, I can afford to throw a rock in the house on my first shot because even though it's not protected by the free guard zone, they're not going to be able to hit it anyway. So you might change your game plan based on the opposition, or learning something about the ice conditions, or learning something else, and then that gets reflected in how you play out ends. All right, so we'll start moving into what Gabrielle calls tactical plans. I think it's mostly just what shots are you calling? So like probably the first major question is, how do you want to set up the end? And we'll talk through some of this. But based on the end plan, it is often just formulaic, like how you're going to set up your lead stones. So depending on how much risk you're willing to take on and what your goal is, there's probably a strategy for lead stones that's going to fit exactly what you want to do, at least on good ice. So if we jump to like the end of the end, I think that skip stones are often easy to call because you're so far into it, you're kind of almost at a point where it's like, all right, it looks like we got to do this to either meet the goal or limit damage or something like that. So skip stones, I think, are often boring in a way. And this is another thing I found about when people talk about curling strategy. A lot of times you'll be presented with this situation where there's a whole bunch of rocks around, and someone will say, all right, so this is hammer for this end, like, what do you think the skip should do? And it's really all about like deciding between one or two shots, and like a lot of times they have to execute a really difficult shot to meet their end goal, or they have to bail from their end goal and accept some lesser result. And that's not an interesting decision to me. I think that the interesting decisions are actually in the middle of the end, and I think that this is where particularly newer skips have the most trouble. I certainly know that this is where I have the most trouble as a person I think we're all developing as skips. And a lot of times it comes down to like making a decision. We had an end plan, 5 rocks ago. Are we sticking with that plan, or do we need to do something else to get out of trouble? So we're going to try to talk about some rules of thumb to help decide what to do in the middle of the end when you need to make a decision about are we going for the are we sticking with the original plan that we had, or can we get out of, or do we need to like change the plan and get out of trouble? Okay, so we need to talk a little bit about aggressive versus conservative play. So we mentioned in thinking about the end plan that the skip needs to decide how much risk to take on. So if you're taking on more risk, you are probably playing more aggressively. And aggressive calls are ones where you're essentially ignoring the opposition rocks and trying to set up your own team's offense, or you're trying to set up for the end plan that you have in mind, and ignoring whatever the opposition is doing. And of course, conversely, conservative play is often much more reactive. You look at, okay, what did the opposing team do? Is there too much risk to ignore their rocks, or am I in a situation where I can afford to just deal with those rocks now if I don't need to be aggressive? So those are the types of both, so aggressive and conservative play, comes into play when you're both thinking about how to develop an end plan, or like what's your end plan going to be, and then also in the middle of the end, can we afford to be aggressive, or do we need to be conservative, or that type of thing. All right. So the next thing I want to do is we're gonna talk through a couple of simple ends. This is a thing that Gabrielle does in her book, and I found it really really useful for starting to understand the kind of rules of thumb that I use for making those decisions in the middle of the end, when there's not a book on, there's kind of a book on like what do you do with lead stones, but once you get further into the end, there's not a manual that you can follow to tell you exactly what to do. So we're gonna look at a couple of different things in curling GG, and the first situation is going to be called hit everything, and we'll look at a couple of situations like what if there's a miss in the middle of that plan, and then we'll also look briefly at a situation called everybody draw the button. So let me stop sharing this one. Let me share a tab, which is going to be this. Okay, do folks see curling house and a whole bunch of stuff?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So this is curling GG. This is the web application that Mikhail developed. You can see that there's you can play a whole game on here, play out a whole game on here if you want. You can there's like the scoreboard to tell you who's the teams. You can change all this stuff. There's different ways of setting up ends, and we might do that in a couple minutes. But to start with, I want to walk through one of these simple ends. So I guess I would say that for this end, both red and blue have a game plan of we're just going to hit everything that we see. We want to keep it super clean. We're just going to hit everything and see what happens. So it's kind of a very simplistic strategy, but I think it's illustrative of some things. Okay, so if we step through here, what's red started out without hammer and they just drew the button. Okay, so then blue hit and rolled a little bit, and then red hit and rolled a little bit, and blue hit and rolled a little bit, and then red was basically hitting nose, and blue hit nose, and red hit nose, and we started to move up the house, and blue hit and rolled, red hit and rolled back toward the center, and on and on and on. We kept like hitting and rolling a little bit, and all of a sudden we got to stone 15, and so it's hammer time for blue. And since this is since this team has like a very rigid game plan and end plan, they hit the red stone. Okay, and that allowed them to score 1 point. So in this like super clean end, assuming that the teams can hit, blue is like kind of limited. All they can do is score one point, right? Like that's the maximum they're gonna ever score. So like, you know, when we're talking about the goals for the hammer team, you know, we're always thinking like, all right, the hammer team should score more than 1 point. And here's a case where the hammer team has like engineered a situation where there's no way to score more than 1 point, assuming that everybody makes the shots that they should probably make. So does blue have any other option in this case?
On rock 16 here.
Yeah, so like this is the situation. So looking at this, like one lonely red in the house.
I mean, they could play for a blank.
Yeah, so they could decide we're gonna hit the red and we're gonna roll ourselves out and take no points, and that allows them to keep hammer into the next end. So it would be very unusual in the middle of the game for blue to like simply play for 1 point. They would probably choose to play for 0 points here. But again, this is a very rigid team, maybe not particularly smart, and they decided, all right, we're gonna take a point. Okay, so the next end is gonna start. Why are we looking at that? Okay, here we go. So the next end is going to start very similarly. Now blue is the non-hammer team. They throw one to the button. Red is going to try to execute that same idea of just hit everything. So they make the first hit, and blue hits back and then rolls to the edge of the sheet. And maybe because it's difficult to throw the edge of the sheet, or you know, maybe the rock picked, or who the heck knows what happened, but red misses the hit. So blue has an opportunity now to throw another rock in the rings, and in this case, they have decided to throw that rock as far away from their existing rock as possible. So they're going to split the house and make red deal with make red deal with two blues in the house. Okay, so again, since red is playing the hit everything strategy, they hit one of them, and blue is still playing hit everything strategy. So just keep exchanging hits, and all of a sudden, like, we get to a point later in the end where, so this is the situation that red is facing on their last stone. So what are the options for red here?
They could try to draw.
So they can try to draw, and if they draw, what are they like? What's the outcome going to be?
1 point.
Okay, so now they'll get 1 point. They have any other options?
I mean, a nose hit on the one in the 8 foot also gets the 1.
Yep.
Yep. So they could have another shot for 1. Any other options?
Risky double for 1 and or a blank.
Yeah. So let's say that, you know, red, of course, they saw blue got forced in the first end, or like kind of gotten, or red or blue took 1 in the first end, and they're like, hey, that wasn't too smart. Like, we would like to not score 1 point. They could try to blank, but it's not an easy blank, and it's not an easy double either. So this is a situation where red might be forced to take 1 point. Everybody understands what, like, the term force, right? Sorry, I can't see anybody, so. All right,
Yes.
I'm gonna say that that's a yes. All right, so red basically has an option, 2 options here. They can either draw the 8 foot or draw the 4 foot for a point, or they can try to hit and stick around for a point. Seems unlikely early in the game that they would be very aggressive and play for the blank. All right, so let's go to end 3. All right, so this starts. So now red is non-hammer team. And again, we're going to hit everything. So blue is going to hit and red's going to hit. We're going to just exchange hits. Apparently, at some point, blue rolled out. So red draws another one to the button. And then on stone 8, or going to stone 9, blue missed a hit. So what is red going to do? So red's got nothing to hit unless they hit their own. So what red could think about doing is guarding up their stone, right? And so now if blue's going to try to hit everything, probably all they can do is peel this guard, and so that's what happens for the next several rocks. And eventually we get to hammer, and now blue has a very difficult shot to score. There's not really anywhere that they can draw, and the shot rock is covered by a nice guard, and so they what they're left with is really just playing a delicate tap on the shot rock to try to score. And so even in curling GG, I had to try this a few times to get the weight and the line right to push that rock off the button and have a blue one stick around. So this is a situation where now blue missed a shot early in the end, and now all of a sudden, like, it gets to hammer, and the skip has a really difficult shot to avoid giving up the steal. So let's see, we got one more we have one more end that I have pre-baked here, which is the draw everything to the button end. So in this case, the teams, maybe this is two new teams, they don't like to hit at all. All they're going to do is just going to keep throwing things to the button. Now, a lot of times when I like talk to people, like my friends that don't know much about curling, they often ask me, well, why don't they just throw all the rocks to the button? Here's the kind of thing that happens if you only throw the rocks to the button. So blue throws to the button, red throws one on top, blue throws one on top, red throws one on top. Maybe blue comes from the other way and they got one sort of on the button on the corner to the red. Red throws another one in there, blue throws another one in there. We keep moving through the end and it's just getting messier and messier. And eventually it probably gets to we're starting to get to a position where red is sitting 2 and maybe they decide, all right, we're not going to throw any more to the button. So maybe we just want to guard it up and make sure that blue doesn't mess this up for us. So in this end, red has hammer. So maybe they're content with their 2 points and they're willing to just junk it up in the front and play out the rest of the end. So what we see here is kind of interesting. So red had hammer, they started throwing all these rocks to the button, and they managed to get 2 rocks in there, and so they did score 2, which, if that's the end goal, that's great. But you'll notice here that those red rocks are surrounded by a bunch of blue ones. So there was some risk here for red. If the rocks lined up in a particular way, and blue was able to, somehow manage to get those red ones out of there, could have been a big score for blue. So red got multiple points, but there was a chance for blue to score multiple points too. One more thing, thinking along those lines, it might have been really difficult for blue to get those red rocks out of there. And yes, there's a bunch of guards in the front, but another thing working against blue in this case is they've actually got some of their own rocks behind the red ones. So their own rocks are working against them if they ever decided to change plans and try to hit their way out of this problem. It's probably going to be really difficult because all those red rocks are going to jam on the blue ones, and they might have to spend multiple stones to clear out the 4-foot. So I'm going to switch back over to the PowerPoint, the presentation for a second. So, what are some things that we've learned from just looking at some like very simple ends here? So couple of things about like positioning stones. So the non-hammer team, they put the hammer team into a sticky situation by playing to the center of the sheet, ending up with like a rock on the button, clogging up the center line, making it really difficult for the hammer team to score, and that wasn't even to score multiple points, that was just to score 1 point. So as a sort of general rule of thumb, the non-hammer team prefers to play toward the center of the sheet. What would have made the situation a lot easier for the hammer team in that situation, and we saw this in the case where the non-hammer team was playing to the wings, was they weren't in so much danger because the play was to the outside. They had an opportunity to draw the 8-foot. Again, that's like a simple draw that if you're aiming to play skip, you want to be able to make that shot routinely. So if the hammer team can keep play on the wings to the sides of the sheet, that's going to keep the hammer team out of trouble and make keep space for the skip to make that bailout shot at the end, take their 1 point, and move along and not give up points to the non-hammer team. So we saw the situation in the throw everything to the button that there were rocks behind the tee line that were actually working against that team. So blue had rocks behind the tee line, and that was possibly going to prevent them from eliminating red stones. So if you can keep rocks in front of the tee line, they can only get closer to the button. Once they're behind the tee line, they can only go out of play, really. So need to be wary of that, because that's an opportunity for the opponent to use your stones against you. Another like really common strategy / tactic is to split the house. So we didn't see a situation where to set up the hammer team to score 2, but that would be a very common thing. In the example that we had, it did allow the non-hammer team to force. There was no really good way for the hammer team to make a double and get out of the end with just a blank. They had to take that. They were forced to take 1 point and give up control of the hammer. So from the throw everything to the button end, this is again, I think an interesting situation where the more rocks in play, the more likely it is that there's going to be a big score. So in the case that we saw, it turned out that the hammer team scored 2 points, but it could have just as easily been the non-hammer team if things had gone slightly differently. And so this is a situation you see a lot of times, that the more rocks that are in play, the more likely that a big score is going to occur. So that is a big advantage to the losing team. So whoever's behind on the scoreboard should be happy when rocks are in play. So this, so when you're like standing in the house, you might think about this. So like a thing that often happens when I'm playing league games is, let's say my team has a lead in the last end, and I call for a shot that's like in the front of the house, and if it happens to be deep and cross the tee line, a lot of times I see the opposition skip sweeping my rock out of the house. And I'm happy about that, because they're taking a rock out of play, and more so they're taking a rock, one of my rocks out of play that would have been sitting behind the tee line, which is a thing that might actually be helping them if they're the losing team. So when you're in a situation when you're losing, try to use the opponent's rocks against them. So sometimes those are rocks in the back of the house. Sometimes that will be like guards that they either intentionally or unintentionally threw, and then you can use them for your advantage. Something that we didn't really see in those examples were that the bigger the scoring area, the more likely that a big score will occur. So that tends to advantage the hammer team. Keeping in mind that the hammer team is often playing to the wings, they're staying away from the center. If the scoring area is big, you can fit more rocks in that area, and oftentimes that leads to a big score. A lot of times when you see really big end score, particularly on TV, it's because the hammer team has a bunch of little nibblers. They're all just biting the house, and they're able to like make a hit and stick on their last stone, and then you see a score of 5 go up on the board. That kind of thing is quite common because the scoring area is really big. So again, not something that we probably saw too closely in the examples, but in general, draws are aggressive and hits are conservative. So, getting to this idea of the more rocks that are in play, it's more likely that a big score is going to occur. So if your team is losing and you need a big score to get back in the game or to win the game in the last end, throwing another rock in play by throwing a draw is probably what you want to do. You want to be aggressive to try to score, get another rock in play, use it to score, use it to keep, maybe it's a guard, so you can use that rock to keep multiple of your rocks in play. And of course, conversely, hits are generally conservative. If you're removing rocks from play, then it's going to be less likely that a big score can occur. So again, if you're the winning team, a lot of times, and this is what you see almost always on TV, when it gets to the last end, the team that's winning is trying to hit everything, just eliminate stones, keep it clean, make sure they can keep hitting, and just run the team out of rocks to finish off the game. So all of those things are like, those all sound good on paper, and hopefully they make sense. But getting, maybe the most important thing here is that you want to have a tactical plan that your team can execute. So I know, like, when I started reading Gabrielle's book and thinking about, okay, draws are aggressive, hits are conservative. If I have a lead, I want to start hitting. If you end up on a team where the players are not consistent hitters, then that kind of end plan, that kind of tactical plan is maybe not a good one. And even though you'd prefer not to play aggressively, maybe your teammates or your team, including yourself, are better suited to play more of a draw game, which happens to be aggressive, and that might get you into some trouble eventually. But if you try to throw a lot of hits and miss hits, so missed shots are, again, getting back to what we said earlier, a lot of these games are won and lost on making and missing shots. So you want to have a tactical plan where your team can actually execute the shots that you're calling. Any questions about any of that? No? Okay, sounds good. Let me just make sure that where we're at. Okay, so we're gonna talk about a little bit of differences between non-hammer play and hammer play. And one thing I've noticed, both in my development and talking to people who are learning to skip, and I hear a lot of people say, like, I just find it easier to play without the hammer. I think there's a few reasons for this. So one is that sometimes this is like the common tactical plans are ones that are easier for new skips to execute, particularly because, like, draws often fit in better into the skill set of newer curlers. And another thing that tends to happen is that when you don't have the hammer, often you're either trying to steal or you're trying to force. So those are both good outcomes for you. And it turns out that the tactical plans for both of those outcomes tend to be aligned. So I'm going to jump back to Curling GG, and we will try to go through a quick end here. All right, so let's go to, we got to finish off this end maybe. Okay, so I started this already. So we said earlier that the non-hammer team is often trying to play to the center of the sheet. And we know that if we have a rock out in front of the house, that rock can't be hit by the opposition. So it's like a free shot for us to take control of the center of the sheet. And so like if for those of you that are lead players, you're probably often told like, all right, center guard, first shot of the end, center guard. So here we go. We got the red team has set up a center guard. They're going to take control of the center of the house. And now blue can't address, or they can't do anything with that redstone. Let's say that they're playing moderately aggressively, and so they draw one to the wing. So we're going to focus on that non-hammer play, but just to touch on like what the hammer team might be doing here. Remember, we said that splitting the house is a good technique, probably for both hammer and non-hammer teams. In this case, the hammer team is like trying to get their first rock set so that actually they can eventually split the house. So again, if the non-hammer team is playing somewhat aggressively, they want to take control of the center of the sheet. They set up that center guard, and if they're trying to set up for a steal, probably the next thing that they're going to do is try to throw a draw around that center guard and get one to the button. So we saw earlier that this is a good situation for a steal because the hammer team, they don't have any direct access to the shot rock at hit weight, and in order to move that rock off, there's probably, in this case, there's like no space to draw to, so it's going to be really hard for them to score a point by just drawing. Maybe there's a way to like come all the way around this and like just get a little bit closer to the pin than red. But most likely, the only thing that blue can do in this case is play a soft weight tap, just try to move red off of the button, and they're probably not going to be able to move it far enough to so that the second blue outcounts the red. So let's say that teams exchange hits all the way through the end, and like now blue is trying to throw on hammer. Let's see if I can. So blue. Where's my broom? Oh, this is not good. I wonder if
for Mikhail.
I wonder if this is a bug for Mikhail. That's going to be unfortunate. Well, it did something. Oh, I know what it did. All right, let's try this again. Done. Here we go. Broom. There we go. All right, now you can see me placing the broom. Let's say I'm going to throw this. Let's see, that's T-line. I need a little more weight than that. I'm going to throw like a 8 or let's try 9 weight and try to come around the guard. And yes, I want to throw the blue rock. Let's see if I can come around the guard and touch the red. Oh, I just squeaked past the guard, and it was just enough weight to move the redstone out of the 4 foot, or enough out of the 4 foot so that blue gets a point. So this situation where red has a rock on the button and it's guarded. So the way that Gabrielle would talk about this is a quality shot rock beneath or covered by a center guard. This is like the optimal steal situation, and you can see here that it's also a pretty good situation for a force. Now, let's say that guard was maybe not maybe that guard wasn't perfect. So like, let's say they needed to throw a guard on their last, red had to throw a guard on their last one, and they ended up there. Well, now blue has an easy opportunity to hit the blue stone and score 2 points. So let's set the broom. Let's hope I got it in the right spot. easily by the guard. All right, 2 points for blue. So red has taken on a bit of risk by ignoring that blue stone over here and trying to set up for a steal. If they make the guard perfectly, then it's going to be difficult for blue to score 2. Probably can't score 2, and it actually is difficult for blue to even score 1. So probably the first thing to know about when you're skipping with in the non-hammer situation is like what is a good steal setup, and the best steal setup is when you have a quality shot rock behind a center guard. Make sense?
Yep.
All right, let me dump all the rocks here. Actually, let me do something else. Okay, so then the next thing we're going to talk about is why is it so hard to score 2 points with hammer? So when you start skipping, I mentioned that a lot of times it's easier to get things set up when you are the non-hammer team. It's very logical to throw a guard, throw one behind it, and now I'm set up for hopefully either a steal or a force. Well, what about hammer team here? So hammer, when we started this end, hammer couldn't do anything to the redstone, so they have to do something else. They have the option of maybe throwing a guard for themselves. They could throw one in the rings and see what red does and leave it in the open, or they could draw around the blue stone or that guard that red put up there. So let's see what happens if blue decides, okay, red has thrown a guard, I'm going to throw onto the T line myself. I'm going to like not let red have easy access to the button. And I need to throw for blue. All right, so here comes blue. They're getting one in there. All right, so red, blue's got one. Blue's got a nice rock in there behind the center guard. Now, let's say, we talked about the good outcomes for non-hammer team are probably either steal or force. So red can actually get themselves set up pretty nicely for a steal here. They just follow that blue one in there. Okay, so it looks like, according to Curling GG, blue is still shot, but blue is going to have a hard time scoring 2 points. So if red wanted to, they could probably play out this whole end and just keep guarding, and blue will have no opportunity to like move this red one out of the way and score a second point. The other, there's also danger for blue here in that the blue rock is actually protecting the red rock, so it's going to, even if they wanted to, if they had access to hitting that stone, it's going to be difficult to get rid of it. So oftentimes, like what it takes to score 2 points is something like what we just described a minute ago, where let's say that guard was maybe not placed in the right spot or following through on like this kind of situation. Let's say red, they tried to throw T-line, but they threw, let's say they threw light. So maybe they threw 4. Okay, so now red's got two guards up there, but blue has the opportunity to draw another one in the house, and let's just say that they throw one to the T line on the wing. So now blue is set up. They've split the house. There might be a chance for red to remove this one, but then blue still has hammer, so they will always have like one more shot to deal with whatever red does. So what it took for, in this case, for blue to score 2 points or set themselves up for scoring 2 points was they needed a miss from red. And when you start to play against teams that execute most of their shots, you can rely less and less on those misses to occur. So that is often what I have found to be the most challenging thing about scoring, trying to score 2 with hammer, is that you're always kind of hoping for something to go wrong for the other team, and that is not the best position to be in. The other kind of way that teams will score 2 points will be like a situation where blue can accomplish multiple things on the same shot. So let's say that, let's set this up a little differently. Let's say that blue threw one out to the wing, and red was able to draw one in. Maybe it's not like perfectly placed, and so blue can try to throw like a downweight hit, and I'll probably do this a couple times until I get it. So is that going to sneak by the guard? All right, yeah. All right, so here's a case where blue has managed to hit and roll. So now they have split the house. They had to make a difficult shot. That is, one, they had to get by the guard. 2, they had to remove that shot stone. And 3, they had to roll to a specific position and not roll out of the house. And now they're set up for 2 points. So they've made one difficult shot, but of course red, like let's say the end is continuing. Let's say red gets one back underneath the center guard. So let's say that we're coming up on hammer. So maybe blue needs 3 points. So if their end plan was score multiple points, they have like very limited options. So they can try to, again, play that like soft weight hit around the center guard, remove the shot stone. Probably can't throw enough weight at that to actually remove the red from play. So what will they have to do? They'll probably have to play something like a long double where they remove both the center guard, run that center guard onto the shot rock, and remove both of the reds. I don't know if curling GG will allow me to throw enough weight to do that, but we will try. Nope. Let's see. I'm going to try to set the broom a little differently. Just missed. Let's try it one more time. A little bit less ice. We're going to dead stuff it. So here's a situation where blue, if they really needed those two points, they would have to make a really difficult shot to get those 2 points, because red has made a good one to throw one back behind the center guard. So we're kind of running up on an hour and a half. There is still plenty more to talk about, so I'm going to suggest that if people want, we can have another session to talk about lead stone strategy. There are a few other things that I wanted to make sure to get to before we wrap up. tab. Okay, so yeah, why is it so hard to score 2 with hammer? All right, so we're curling GG is great. You can diagram things up, see what kind of strategies might work. Thing about curling GG is the shots are always made exactly how you call them. If you set the broom in the right spot, the shot's going to be made, and you can undo it and go do it again if you need to. That is obviously not what it's like when you're playing in San Jose or Fremont, or when you're like watching the pros on TV. So I'm sure everybody understands like why that's the case. One is our ice isn't pristine. It doesn't curl both ways. We have falls. We have, sometimes we're slow or sometimes we're super fast. And of course, the players aren't perfect. I suggest that people not try to learn too much in detail from watching Canadian curling in particular, because they never miss, or the misses are like very, very minor, and that's how they take advantage of things and eventually try to generate points. Of course, we don't have that situation, on our teams. So a couple of things that I've noticed about like what this might mean as far as like adjusting classic strategy to playing in San Jose or Fremont versus like what you learn in a book or what you're going to dial up on curling GG. So one thing is, I have found that hammer is not nearly as important in league play as when you watch on TV. The like pro level game is very much about hammer control and like trying to carry that through. And if you don't score, if it's not shaping up for 2 points, give up and blank the end and try again in the next end. That doesn't really happen in our league play. I can only really remember like 1 or 2 cases where I intentionally blanked an end, and in those were cases that like sort of just presented itself late in the end. There are way more steals in our games than you'll see on TV. Partly that's because the players aren't perfect, and I think that's also because it's sometimes difficult to throw hits on our wonky ice where, and people are reluctant to throw hits on our wonky ice where it's all or nothing. Sometimes it's a lot better to throw an imperfect draw than try a hit where if it sails through the house, you got nothing out of the shot. So probably don't need to worry as much about hammer control. It's probably a good thing to be aware of as you like start to play on better ice. If you go to Bonspiels where you play competitively, having control of hammers becomes more and more important. But when you're getting started and playing in league, I'd say it's not that important. You might also want to choose quote unquote unorthodox tactics. So I had a very experienced skip tell me that doesn't matter if they have hammer or not, they're playing a center guard. They want to control the center of the house, and if they don't have hammer, then they're getting set up for a steal. And if they do have hammer, they have a rock that they can tap up, or at least prevent the opposition from getting a rock there and setting up that setting up something for a tap. So those are the kinds of things that happen when we're playing in San Jose and Fremont. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is a goal when you start skipping should be playing at a reasonable pace. Really, we should be trying to play such that you can complete 7 ends in the time that we have allotted to us. Keep in mind that league play is not the Olympics or the Scotties or the Brier or U.S. Nationals or whatever. So whether you pick the optimal shot or not, it's it doesn't really matter. And in fact, I think it might be better to not choose the optimal shot. I mean, this is like league play is all about learning. So use it as an opportunity to make some mistakes and try to figure out like, okay, why did I pick this? Why didn't it work? What could I have done differently in those cases? And when you're presented with multiple, what I would call reasonable options, just pick one and go with it. If there's a situation where it's like really a 50-50 between two different shots, then it probably means that it doesn't matter which one you pick. Just go with the one that you feel a little bit more confident with and do it. If you're really stumped, try not to like stare at the situation and look for something where something that you've missed. You've probably not missed anything. There probably just are multiple reasonable options, or there's not any like one obvious option. Maybe that's a case that you want to think about later. You want to have a conversation with somebody later. Have your phone in your pocket, snap a picture of it, talk about it at the bar with the opposition or your team, or post it on the Slack strategy channel. There's Mikhail again has been doing a good job of posting some interesting situations that he's come across in league games where he didn't know what necessarily to do, or there was disagreement among his team about what to do. That's great opportunity for all of us to kind of learn together. And then the last thing I'll say, as far as like a tip for playing at a reasonable pace, this is a thing that I'm sure lots and lots of people have done in the past, but the person that first told me about this was Gary Van de Valk when I was playing Vice for him, and I was a newer curler, and he would always ask me while we were standing in the house waiting for the other team to throw, what are we going to throw if they miss their shot completely? And let's plan that out. It's probably pretty obvious because like we have an end plan, and this is a free opportunity for us to get closer to executing our achieving the goals of our end plan. And then the other scenario we want to be ready for is, what are we going to do if they make their shot perfectly? So if you're skipping, we talked about on Sunday that you want to keep track of like where the opposition is like placing the broom so that you can use their shots to map the ice. So you're probably already paying attention a bit to what the opposition is doing. If you're able to figure out like what they're trying to do, and of course they're all communicating amongst themselves, so they are probably signaling like, all right, we want to draw here, we want to hit this rock, we want to hit and roll. So you probably know what they're trying to do. Try to have a plan in place, shot in mind in place if they make their shot perfectly. And that way, when it comes time for you to throw, you will at least have some options on the spectrum of, if they made it perfectly, we want to do this, and if they didn't make it, or we're going to do this, and if they completely miss, we're going to do that. And most of the time shots are made but not perfectly in our league. So at least you'll have somewhere, some idea of like, if you know, like those are the two extremes, you can probably pick something out that's in between those two, that'll work for you. And that's a way to start calling shots in a reasonable time frame. Just as like to throw out some like time numbers, I would say that the beginnings of ends, you should probably be able to make shot calls within 10 seconds. And at the end of an end, probably within 30 seconds. If something is like really complicated, it might take a minute, but keep in mind, like we're trying to play an entire end in 15 minutes. So if you spend 1 minute on a decision and you still got to skate down and grab your rock, like it's going to be really hard to keep that pace. So it's really easy to get off of the pace towards 7 ends. Okay, so it's 9 o'clock. I'm happy to hang around and talk strategy as long as people want. or at least until I get super hungry. If anybody has things that they want to talk about or questions or anything else, I'm happy to hang around. Otherwise, I think we'll at least pause the presentation part of this until a future date, and we can talk at that. We might talk specifically about how do you use lead stones to set up for an end plan. Does that work for people?
Yep.
All right. Does anybody want to hang around?
I gotta go, but thank you.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, yeah, I will take silence as a no, so I'm going to stop recording here, if I can. Where's the thing? Stop recording.